Gospel Reflections for the 6th Sunday of Ordinary Time, Year A, 12th of February 2023. The Gospel reading is from Matthew chapter 5 verses 17 to 37. The main focus of this Gospel text is this. Jesus calls us to live a life of greater righteousness than the scribes and the Pharisees in areas of human relationships, sexual behavior, marital fidelity, and truthfulness by striking at the root of all evil acts. In brief, the main theme is this: striking at the root of immoral acts. In today's gospel, Jesus gives a broader and radical interpretation or meaning to the Old Testament laws without abolishing them altogether. He focuses not only on external evil acts committed by breaking the laws, but also on the wrong attitudes and evil motives that lead to such acts. He calls his new interpretation of those laws fulfillment of the Old Testament, meaning a filling up of what is lacking in them or completing what is incomplete in them. He focuses not only on the external evil acts like murder, adultery, etc., but also on the evil thoughts and intentions that originate in human mind and eventually lead to those acts. The present text shows how Jesus fulfills the Old Testament laws by teaching his disciples to strike at the root of murder by giving up anger or resentment and working towards reconciliation. Number 2, of adultery by renouncing lustful desires from one's heart. Number 3, of divorce by advocating lifelong fidelity of the spouses to each other. And number 4, of false swearing or oaths by following a path of absolute honesty, truthfulness, and integrity. Jesus wants his disciples to live a life of righteousness or holiness that exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees in chapter 5 verse 20 by following his new and radical understanding of the Old Testament law. Whereas the scribes and Pharisees speak about bad fruits or evil actions, Jesus wants his disciples to strike at the very roots of those bad fruits that are embedded in human heart. Thus, Jesus' principle is no roots, no fruits. No bad roots, no bad fruits. Let us take only one of his radical teachings on the Old Testament law of not committing murder. For Jesus, murder is rooted in human nature of nursing anger. Anger, though natural, already carries murder in the form of a germ, if not bridled. He wants his disciples to strike at the very root of murder, which is in their tendency to nurse anger, hatred, revenge against others. Anger is closely related to violence, which is deeply rooted in human heart. Its fruits are seen by the way people nurse bitterness, resentment, hatred, and revenge against their offenders that go for days, months, and sometimes for years. The fruits of resentment are also seen in the vulgar, abusive, and violent language used by people, including children, at those with whom they are angry. Jesus gives in the given text an example of calling our brothers and sisters, "you fool," in chapter 5 verse 22. Though this may not sound highly abusive in our culture, but in the Bible it means invoking a divine curse on them. Just think of the name calling done and demeaning words used on people of a different race, ethnic group, or a caste they consider lower. Even in civilized countries that claim to give equal civil rights to their citizens in their constitutions and legal system. Our everyday language is full of violent words such as bang, smash, thrash, shoot, kick, hammer, etc. For some, the use of obscene and filthy language becomes the order of the day. Often, we indirectly approve of such a violent language by rejoicing and laughing over it. Children imitate the culture of violent, obscene, and abusive language from their parents, elders, and companions. Jesus reminds us today that sometimes killing is done not with knives or guns or by terrorist bombs alone. It is also done with heart-piercing and unforgettable words. Heart-piercing and unforgettable words. In the biblical story of Cain and Abel, in Genesis chapter 4 verses 1 to 16, we see how Cain's envy and anger towards his brother Abel ended up in resentment, hatred, and cold-blooded murder. Jesus' teaching makes us admit that there is a Cain sitting inside of each one of us who broods over the offenses caused by those who have wronged us and imagines or plans terrible things against them. This Cain is nothing else but our own mind that gives into aggressive, revengeful, and violent behavior against our brothers and sisters. We have to admit that there is something of the wild beast in all of us lurking at the door, just waiting to pounce on us. But we must master it, as Genesis says in chapter 4, verse 7. If violence is not contained or mastered, it will create havoc in human and social relationships and contribute to the all-prevailing culture of violence in our society. Like Cain, when we try to cover up our guilt and refuse to accept responsibility for our violent behavior, God's voice comes to us loudly and clearly. Are you not your brother's or sister's keeper? Genesis chapter 4 verse 9. Are you not responsible for your misdeeds and answerable to your God for creating and promoting a culture of violence in the world? Today, Jesus asks those of us who consider ourselves righteous, regular churchgoers, and spiritual-minded persons to answer this question. Though you have not literally murdered anybody, have you not sometimes murdered the good reputation of your adversaries through defamation, character assassination, and the use of abusive language against them? By spitting venom against them and going after their blood, have you not murdered them in your heart? How many people have you stabbed, not in the front, but in the back? In the midst of prevailing culture of violence in our world today, that is life-threatening, Jesus invites us to create a culture of active non-violence that is life-promoting. We can do it in various ways, such as by consciously cultivating non-violent language in our speech. Number 2, by opposing violent and foul language and promoting polite and kind language, especially among the children. Number 3, by following the path of non-aggressive behavior in our personal lives. And number 4, by taking steps towards reconciliation with those who have offended us. Jesus' teaching motivates us to take active steps to overcome belligerent and hostile attitudes and violent tendencies within us and in our communities, instead of merely feeling sad about it. Oh, how sad it is. Instead of saying that, Jesus says that any genuine worship or offering our gifts at the altar must be sustained by reconciliation of broken relationships with our brothers and sisters if it has to be acceptable to the Lord. Chapter 5, verses 23 and 24. Jesus gives the example of an accused man taking steps to reconcile with his accuser while on the way to the court. In chapter 5, verses 25 and 26, to emphasize the point that the offended party should take the first step towards reconciliation rather than waiting for the offender to come and apologize first. Do we? A prayer. Purify our hearts and inner attitudes, O Lord. Teach us the language of love and the need to cultivate diligently non-violent and non-aggressive behavior by constantly seeking the path of forgiveness and reconciliation. Amen.